Welcome back to Norse Mythology, Masterclass Unlocking Ancient Secrets. In this episode, we will dive into the written sources that have preserved Norse mythology for us today. We'll explore the beginnings of literacy in Scandinavia, the significant texts and manuscripts, and the role of Skaldic and Eddic poetry in keeping the Norse myths alive. Written sources. Literacy in Scandinavia began in the Viking Age, primarily introduced by the Church, which brought books and Latin literacy, including the Latin alphabet. The first evidence of books in Scandinavia is from the 11th century. However, the Jelling runestone from 960-65 CE in Denmark suggests that books were already known in southern Scandinavia by the time it was created. The runes on the Jelling stone are organized as if they were written in a book, indicating an early familiarity with written texts. The earliest literature written down in Scandinavia included law material, regal lists, histories, and biblical texts. These writings laid the foundation for a literary tradition that would later encompass more creative and traditional material. In Iceland, writers began to create saga literature from the late 12th century. The sagas focused on Scandinavian kings, the first Icelandic settlers, and ancient legendary heroes. Skaldic poetry from the Viking Age played a crucial role in these sagas, providing historical knowledge within the narrative prose, which is just ordinary written or spoken language without structured meter or rhyme. Skaldic poetry, recorded in prosometric form, often appears within prose stories where characters recite poems. Other poems were recorded in lists and compilations, with many including mythological references and content. This practice helped preserve the rich oral tradition of the Vikings. In 1220, Snorri Sturluson wrote the Edda, the most comprehensive collection of material on Old Norse mythology. Snorri's primary goal was to explain Skaldic diction and meter, as Skaldic poetry was essential for historical knowledge in Iceland and Scandinavia. Snorri used Eddic poetry, sourced from earlier manuscripts, to explain the content of Norse mythology. He drew from poems such as The Prophecy of the Seeress, Grimnir's Sayings, Vafthrudnir's Sayings, and Skirnir's Poem, among others. These sources, including Eddic poetry from before, during, and after the Viking Age, Skaldic poetry, Snorri's prose Edda, Sagas, and other short stories from 1200 to 1500, and Latin histories from Denmark and Norway, provide a multifaceted view of Norse mythology. It's important to note that literacy in Scandinavia was closely tied to the church and regal institutions. Old Norse mythology, therefore, is part of a post-conversion Christian literature and does not stand alone as an independent source of pre-conversion Scandinavian beliefs. Skaldic poetry. Skaldic poetry emerged as a distinct art form in Scandinavia in the 700s. It is a distinctly Scandinavian innovation based on older Germanic poetic forms. While closely associated with Norway and Iceland, Skaldic poets were also found in Denmark, Sweden, and the British Isles. Most Skaldic poetry has been recorded in medieval Icelandic manuscripts, but some examples exist in runic carvings. The meter of Skaldic poetry is notably complex. The Karlevi stone from Öland, Sweden, displays Skaldic poetry from the early 1000s CE. This stone commemorates a ruler named Sibbi, who ruled land in Denmark. The text includes various kennings, metaphorical expressions central to Skaldic poetry and Norse mythology. Kennings are circumlocutions that use layered meanings to refer to a subject, often making allusions to Norse myths. Before the conversion to Christianity, Skaldic poetry likely held religious significance. Rulers employed skalds to compose poetry about their lives and heroic deeds. Upon a ruler's death, the skald would compose a eulogy, commemorating the ruler for posterity. In Iceland, Skaldic poetry became a significant tool for legitimizing the power of newly settled chieftains in the 800s, maintaining the memory of their ancestors' journeys, land acquisitions, and hegemony. By the 1200s, Skaldic poetry was losing momentum, especially in mainland Scandinavia, where continental literature, like French courtly romance, was gaining popularity. However, it remained important in Iceland, where Snorri Sturluson sought to preserve it through his writings. Snorri's Edda, written around 1220, aimed to record and explain Skaldic poetry and Norse mythology, reacting to the changing attitudes in Scandinavian society. Eddic poetry. Eddic poetry is considered the oldest form of Germanic poetry, characterized by its alliterative meter. This form shares similarities with Old English poems like Beowulf and Old High German poetry. Eddic poetry includes at least 6 different kinds of meter, with fornyrdislag, or meter of old words, being the oldest. An example of this meter can be seen in the Firby stone from Sweden. The Poetic Edda, a collection of Eddic poems compiled in the 13th century, includes mythological and heroic tales. Poems such as The Prophecy of the Seeress describe the creation and destruction of the world, while others feature dialogues and monologues with Odin as the protagonist. The collection contains 10 poems about gods and 19 about ancient heroes, offering a rich source of Norse mythology. In 1643, the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda was delivered to the Icelandic bishop of Skalholt, Brynjolfur Sveinsson. The manuscript, initially thought to have been written by Iceland's first historian Saymundur Sigfusson, was later dated to 1270 CE and renamed the Poetic Edda. This manuscript, along with other Eddic poems found outside the Codex Regius, has preserved the oldest and most authentic Norse myths. Snorri's Edda. Snorri Sturluson composed his Edda around 1220 CE as a literary treatise on Skaldic poetry. After visiting Norway in 1218 and composing a Skaldic praise poem for the Norwegian king, Snorri returned to Iceland with a mission to preserve this art form. His Edda is divided into 4 sections: a prologue, the delusion of Gylfi, the language of poetry, and Hatatal. The prologue introduces the Christian timeline of paganism in Northern Europe, explaining how the Aesir, the Norse gods, were essentially humans who migrated from Troy and were later revered as deities. The delusion of Gylfi narrates how a Swedish king named Gylfi is deceived by the Aesir, who tell him stories about Norse mythology. The language of poetry delves into the kennings and heidi used in Skaldic poetry, providing stories to explain these metaphors. Hatatal, composed in Norway, enumerates different meters used in Skaldic poetry. Snorri's work encases Norse mythology within a universal Christian history, using interpretive methods familiar to the Christian intellectuals of his time. His Edda remains a crucial source for understanding Norse mythology and Skaldic poetry. In this episode, we've explored the written sources that have preserved Norse mythology, from the earliest laws and regal lists to the creative saga literature of Iceland. We've delved into the importance of Skaldic and Eddic poetry, and the efforts of Snorri Sturluson to preserve these traditions. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the secrets of Norse mythology, exploring more myths, gods, and legends that shaped the ancient Norse world.